Yeah, it's a really good question, Andy. And I think probably to start with, the first thing that I would say that we need to recognize is nutrition is quite a young discipline in relation to other disciplines. So, for example, in relation to medical, physiotherapy, strength and conditioning, there's probably a lot of similarities with nutrition and psychology within professional sport, definitely in terms of the full-time equivalents across the world. I mean, I guess thinking back for me, and I've already referenced this once before, but thinking back to the EIS days in 2006, I remember before I joined the fast track program, coming out of my MSc, there was only probably a handful of full-time sports nutritionists working in the UK. And actually, to think about that now and reflect on it, I find it quite incredible. I actually had a chat to a couple of my colleagues recently and said, do you remember back then what the industry looked like? So it was really quite small. And I think it's taken a long time for nutrition to be understood and accepted. And I think, especially within football, which I'll probably reference most of mine and our work from today. I think probably thinking back to the early days then, reminiscing, 15 years ago, I think the conversation was very different, especially in my first roles within team sports. I think actually the conversation in nutrition was seen slightly more negatively. And what I mean by that is a lot of the performance questions posed by athletes and posed by coaches were around body fat and weight. And you were told to go and see the nutritionist in a slightly negative way if you needed to lose weight. And it was almost seen as the nutritionist would be telling the chefs what they couldn't prepare. So it took a while, I think, to change that approach. Actually comparing that to athletics, which was my first sport, I think we were probably more progressive at the time early on, and I think that was probably due to having quite a strong group of practitioners there at the time. I mean, some of the guests you will, I think, had on the show already. I worked very closely in the same office. We had Raf Brandon, we had James Moore, Alex Wolf, Mark Young, and Paul Dykstra. So there was a really good performance team there, and I think personally that helped me to embed my nutrition service within athletics. But I think probably comparing that to football, I remember first joining Arsenal. And I think probably the key thing on my mind at that point was really demonstrating to each player the effect that nutrition could have on their performance. And I think the easiest win at that time was to affect their energy levels on match day, to show them that, look, what you eat on match day can fundamentally improve how you feel and your physical capacity during a match. And I think once we had that hook early on with the players, it was really easy then to build a relationship and build the service out into the club. But I think it really did then start with the players to, get that buy-in early on. I think at the time that was really important. And I guess, the second part of that, Andy, really is fast forwarding to where we are today. And, as we all know, nutrition has increased rapidly. The provision of nutrition has increased dramatically at the top professional sports, both in Europe and in the US. We now have got more practitioners within teams and a better quality of chefs providing food service as well within those teams. And I think nutrition is generally better understood. But probably an important point to note is, maybe with some of your listeners, we're working at top teams in the US and in Europe. The next level down in the pyramid, the nutrition provision isn't as strong. It's still very underdeveloped in comparison to these other disciplines. I think part of the reason why nutrition now has got better engagement from sporting directors, from coaches, is that previously they've experienced the service as athletes. We've worked with a few sports that the sporting director has experienced it as an athlete and really knows how to use the service and knows what performance questions to ask. For example, they'll know that a key amount of time should be focused on strategies for player preparation or athlete recovery, as opposed to focusing maybe on these more, ancient being the wrong word, but body composition and body fat, where the focus maybe was early on. So I think in general, Andy, there's a really nice opportunity now for practitioners to really individualize nutrition strategies with athletes, depending on physical training loads, depending on match demands, and also the athlete goals as well.